everybody, and welcome to The Art of Aging, which is part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from United Church Homes. And on this show, we look at what it means to age in America and in other places around the world with positive and empowering conversation that challenge, encourage, and inspire everyone everywhere to age with abundance. Very, very pleased to have this week's guest on the show, and pleased to introduce Ryan Frederick. And Ryan is certainly no stranger to the world of aging and aging in the places that we choose to call home. He is a thought leader that focuses on the intersection of place and healthy longevity, including he is the author of the bestselling Right Place, Right Time, The Ultimate Guide to Choosing a Home for the Second Half of Life. His work has been featured in CBS News, Forbes, Kiplinger, and other national outlets. His content has reached tens of thousands of people through keynote talks, workshops, courses, videos, blogs, online assessments, and, of course, his book. In addition to consumer content, Ryan provides strategic consulting services to a wide range of organizations, including for-profit and not-for-profit senior living providers. He has held executive leadership roles at Erickson Living. He is the principal at Coastwood Senior Housing Partners, and an assistant to the executive team at Sunrise Senior Living. So Ryan, thank you very much for being on the show, and we're looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mike. I'm glad to connect and have this conversation with you.
Yep. So just for a reminder for everybody, if we are listening to this, around September of 2023, our annual Ruth Frost Parker Center Symposium will be held the first week of October, and the topic for this year is Ending Ageism. But if you're listening to this at some point in the future, our Ruth Frost Parker Center is a terrific resource at our Thought Leadership Center at United Church Homes for abundant aging and on the topic of addressing ageism and ageist beliefs. So please check them out and know that our annual symposium happens every October of every year. So Ryan, I always like to start out these discussions just by, there was so much in that biography. I was like sort of absorbing it while I was reading it. So sorry to the listeners for stumbling over that, but I was just, really just enjoying taking a look at it. But obviously, you could be doing a lot with your career. You could be doing a lot with thought leadership. How did you choose the world of aging and aging innovation?
Yeah, I in the light of time, I'll give you the abridged version, Mike. But the shorter version was I was trained as an electrical engineer in college and worked in Silicon Valley for a couple of startups, one of which went public, and it was a crazy growth time. And I thought, oh goodness, this business thing's pretty easy. But then we had an ethical scandal in this company, and actually about 5 people went to jail. It was around the same time as Enron. Several for insider trading, but several really were fraudulent sales contracts. And so I went to business school at Stanford, and I took a step back and I said, what do I want to do with my life? Where do I want to really find opportunities that link my head and my heart? And I was close to my grandparents growing up, was mentored by a 6th grade English teacher of mine who took our class to a local assisted living community. This is in Northern California, and I got to be buddies with a woman named Melba Rollins, and we kept meeting through not just 6th grade, but 7th and 8th grade, and really kind of put on my heart the fact that one of the mega trends over my lifetime, our lifetime, is just people living longer. And at that time, this is about 20 years ago now, not many people were thinking about this, certainly as compared to today. And very few people were really on the innovation side of it. How can we do this better? How can we build better products, create better experiences, inspire people to do more? And yeah, so for me, it was pretty intentional. And it started, I started by a summer internship where I lived actually in a senior living community outside of Atlanta for a month. My wife elected to not join me, so I was left unsupervised. Only male, only person under 75 in my wing, and a lot of funny stories, but it really inspired me to say, wow, this is impactful and also can be better. And so that has led me now to this path of writing and speaking, strategy consulting, creating new products. It's really been a joy for me.
It is always interesting for me to ask us that question because, I mean, people sort of come into aging and aging innovation from all, as you've just demonstrated, from all walks of life. Now, I mean, that's such an interesting story how you've sort of seen, the cutthroat world of business. You've seen, what's ethical and what's not. And then you've really chosen to focus on using those skills, into something that's very purposeful for you. And a lot of people, will talk about these personal relationships they've had, and you also are kind of repeating a talking point that I like to say, that really when you're looking at future market demand in this world right now, the only two things that I can think about with certainty are, the age wave and climate change. The age wave is a little bit of a selfish move, I think, because it's our future ourselves, as well as also being responsible with climate because it's our future ourselves. But it's almost like, we have this big pig in the python, don't we? We have this sort of, I don't know, if I just get more and more aware of just how big the baby boomer cohort is. I mean, when you're taking a look at the people that are in their 80s and 90s now, and you take a look at the people that are just coming into it, I mean, we've got a big scalability thing going on, or an issue, don't we?
We do. For my book, Johns Hopkins is the publisher, and it's my first book. I studied engineering to avoid reading and writing, so there's a lot of irony in this. But they said it's really helpful if if your book's in good shape before it gets to us. So I hired my daughter, who now is a freshman in college. At the time, she was a sophomore in high school. I hired her, and she's good at reading, she's good at reading and writing. And I said, go, make the pages bleed. And she did. She, I think, thoroughly enjoyed correcting her dad's work. But in that process, one of the things that happened was, as a field, as a senior health living field, understandably, there's a lot of talk about baby boomers and, to your point, the size of them and the way that they think differently, and their investment and financial capabilities, good and bad. But the broad narrative is, of course, is much more than that. It's my daughter's generation. It's her kids. We're rewriting this narrative around like living longer. And it's not just, while the baby boomers may be taking the headlines in different circles, it has pretty wild ramifications for what does it mean to pick on my daughter for a second. To if you're a freshman in college, what does it look like if there's a decent chance you might live to 100? How do you think about the different stages in life? How do you think about place, which is, of course, something we're going to dive into here today? So I'm with you. I'm looking through the same glasses in this. I can't think right now of a more interesting, more impactful, more global mega trend for which we have opportunities to make an enormous difference as part of this. So I'm grateful to be part of this narrative.
And I'll tell you something, Ryan. It seems like, just to that same point in terms of, funds and people that are willing to take a look and invest in solutions in aging, new, interesting, innovative solutions in aging. If I were to look back 10 years ago, you could see tumbleweeds, blowing through investor camps. And now we seem like we have more and more. We just seems like, and even major corporations are kind of taking a closer look at this. And I was very pleased. And again, we're filming this, recording this on September 18th of 2023. Last week, I went to the first ever Age Tech Collaborative sort of conference that AARP puts on. That's AARP's innovation arm. And it's a mix of startups in the space, new, and they've got a terrific sort of structure for looking at startups in the space and giving them their promotion. They think it's great, but also just the companies that were there. You take a look at least in September, General Mills showed up this time. We have, you have Prudential and John Hancock in the long-term care insurance space. You've got Ford Motor, you've got, Samsung, you've got all of these companies that are now sort of being part of this community. And I don't think it's for, just for charitable reasons. Right. So, and that means we have to kind of listen a lot closer to really the intent and demands of people as they age. And I'm sort of wanting to build a bridge here into the topic we're talking about today, because you are an expert on place, where we choose to age. And I think that, where we choose to age has a lot of different things to unpack. I mean, there's safety, there's convenience, there's community, there's all those things. And it's almost like a default that we say that, when people say, what do they want to do as they age? Well, I want to age in my own home. I want to age in my own home for as long as I want and all of that. But, it almost seems like that's just kind of the default, and we just assume that is the correct answer. But that's not the only. I mean, I don't know if that's the right way to look at things. I mean, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, well, I don't. Punchline. Before I address that one piece, I wanted to mention back to your point of this, the global. It's on the radar screen now of so many organizations. This piece in my book, Right Place, Right Time. I had there is a self-assessment in there to evaluate, are you in the right place, and which we'll talk about in a moment. That I then took that online to my company here, HERE, the website's here.life. That's been taken by thousands of people. And Mike, it's people in every continent now have taken it, except for Africa and Antarctica. So I'm guessing it'll be a matter of time before people from Africa, I'm not sure Antarctica will be getting too many responses.
I'll never say never.
But never say never. But it reinforces the fact that this is these topics. It's not, it's much broader than the U.S. and other places can learn from us, and we can learn from other places. Back to your point about place and aging. Through, I guess, a series of observations and life experiences, I kind of came to this conclusion that as a society and also at an individual level, we don't give place as much weight as we should. And when I say, let me unpack that for a second. When I say place, I don't just mean like your four walls, which is often what we think about. My house or my condo, my apartment. It's more that's true. That's definitely an important part of it. But it's also, what block do you live in? What neighborhood? What metropolitan area? Are you suburban, urban, rural? What state? What region of the country? What region of the world? All of these things, it's a composite that makes up your lived experience. You might love your four walls, but find out that you don't know your neighbors anymore. Or you might find that the direction, the fiscal health of your county or your state isn't what it once was, and that gives you concern about your four walls. Or you might realize that you don't love your house doesn't love you the way you do does it for you. And as Bill Thomas, a friend, Eden Alternative and so on, he's pointed out. And you might find, well, I want to stay in my neighborhood, but actually I need to change places and so on. So you've got unpacking what I mean by physical place is really a composite of those different layers. But then when we think about successful aging or healthy longevity, so much of it's determined by our lifestyle decisions and our environment. So it's about purpose, it's about social connections, it's about physical well-being, it's about being financially well, but it's also about a place that meets your physical, mental, and psychological needs. And because that's the good news, like by most accounts, researchers tell us our DNA, especially at midlife and beyond, only accounts for about 20% of our longevity. So we can have agency in this. And that's why I believe sometimes place gets overlooked, because places change, as do people. And back to your point about climate change, you might have, I was just earlier today on a Zoom with a group out on the West Coast, and they have an incident now where, wildfires are a bigger issue. And that raises some concerns about safety, also about just air quality. And so places are changing. That's an obvious one, but you have inflationary conditions, you have culture change, a bunch of things that change place. So if you've been somewhere from 20 years, if you say you moved into a place 20 years ago, it's different today. And if you look forward, it's going to be different. But then also you change. Your preferences, your needs, what you value. If it's not you do, but so does your spouse or partner. And it may mean that you prefer a different space or prefer a different lifestyle. And So a lot of what I'd say the fundamental point in this, Mike, is that I believe there's an opportunity for at the individual level to on a regular basis calibrate whether you're in the right place at the right time. By the way, that's the book focuses on the second half of life, but that calibration is really relevant throughout your entire lifetime. Where you choose to go to adult lifetime, choose where you go to college, your first place to work, where you want to raise kids. The average adult moves at least a dozen times, but it also has important implications for your audience and our field, which is how can we create great places so
Right.
that more people can say, you know what, actually, that's the place I want to thrive in my next chapter.
That's
And the
right.
more that we can do that thoughtfully, compelling way, I think the more likely more people may not just find themselves, oh my gosh, I have to do this. No, actually, this is the right place for me to thrive. And at the same point in time, recognize maybe some of the gaps that they may find just focusing on the aging in place lens. They may say, if I'm honest with myself, this place is not what it once was. And then I look to what my needs and preferences are. It really doesn't meet them now and may not meet them in the future as well.
You know what's going through my mind right now, Ryan, is just this sense of need and want, right? So if you ask people what they want in the future, they will say, "Well, I want to age at home," and then it becomes kind of this anchor there, where it's more like, "What do you need?" or more importantly, "What do you value?" And that's sort of like looking at the place. Maybe it's just in terms of the things that you value and the things that you need. And when you think about it, your home, you love your home, but your home does jobs for you, right? It does jobs for you. And if it no longer does these jobs from what you need and what you value, then an assessment like yours, like the one I was here.life, I believe is what you said,
That's right. You're done.
can be an incredibly useful tool. I recall that when we look at sales cycles, okay, in terms of what we need and what we want, right? What we need, things like home care services, things like memory care, things like skilled nursing beds. Those are really short term needs. Something's happened. We got to get this in now. Boom, boom, boom. When it comes to making a choice to move into, let's say, a age 55 plus community or any sorts of other communities, obviously the sales cycle is much, much longer. It's years. But then when people move into those communities, a lot of what we hear is, I wish I would have made this choice earlier. I wish I would have gotten here earlier. Has that been your experience as well?
Well, I would say on the sales cycle piece, I would say it depends, Mike, because one of the things that, as I mentioned, some of the strategy work that here does, it's a wide range of groups. And some of those groups are in the active adult space and active adult, for this purpose, like rental communities. And in a rental 55 plus community where there maybe is some pent up demand, there can be, a sales cycle for sure. But I do know that, you're seeing places and where that sales cycle may not be as long as you might find in a traditional life plan community, because there's a pull factor that happens. We'll in light of the recent loss of Jimmy Buffett, we'll elevate Margaritaville for a second. When you see the
Absolutely.
story about Margaritaville, I think there's something to be learned there, where they've got a waiting list. It seems like measured in years now for their communities in South Carolina, I think in Florida as well, and they have plans to build one in Texas and some other places. People are saying that's a lifestyle that I want to be part of. That's a cohort I want to be part of. And I'm not suggesting that either of us are parrot heads or much of your audience may or may not be, but this idea, the more that there can be a pull factor. When I say pull, it means I want to be there. The more likely you do two things. One, you accelerate the sales cycle. The other thing you do is you also expand your market, because you're going to have people that will naturally, particularly for life plan communities and parts of senior housing, that will need desire, recognize the value of a continuum of care or having the ability to provide healthcare as needed. But if you have, and I would describe that as the push factor. Okay, feel like I'm being pushed in now. Whereas if you have this pull factor, oh my gosh, this really is a place to thrive. And so I do think that as more people, it's difficult, it's hard, but as more people lean into, oh my gosh, I'm 65 and I might live another 35 years. What chapters do I want that to look like? Then I think you start to raise some questions about, is my current dwelling the right one for me? And by the way, I'm not advocating that anyone should move. I'm not saying. What I am advocating is be thoughtful about what's right for you. And I do a fair amount of keynote speaking. There's a video I use for some of it. It's a German company that put it together, but it talks about, in a very powerful way, the power of purpose in people's lives. And it talks about this. It shows this gentleman who he's presumably in his 70s. He's lifting kettlebells. He's doing squats, and his neighbors are alarmed about how he might hurt himself.
Right.
But he actually has a deep purpose related to family for doing this. I won't spoil the punchline.
Well, and for listeners, let's Ryan, if you want to send that to us after we record, we'll put that in the comments of our YouTube video and all that, and we'll get there. But and unlocking this thing about purpose. You mentioned Margaritaville, and what I jotted down here. Now, people want this lifestyle, not just a place to live. And when I look at a lot of senior living operators, with their marketing, I really can't tell one from the other, right? It's all kind of just the same. It's all, best practice, it follows, but it's all kind of the same types of photographs. It's the same types of copy, and it's sort of selling just the concept that there's a senior living community versus that particular one, because they're all going to have happy photos of residents and maybe, and things like that. But, when I reflect on what you've just been talking and on your origin story, what we opened up with, it seems like we know that the choice of moving from one place to the other may be dependent on how much your identity is wrapped up in your home and what the home means to you. Like, I have my hobbies here. I have that old car in my garage that I love and things like that. Yeah. But then it's also that sense of purpose. So the dynamism of kind of changing, will I lose my identity? Will I have purpose? Those play a lot into that choice making, right?
Hugely. See, I think you got two threads on this, Mike. You got a thread where people like look around and say, "Oh my gosh, this whatever dwelling I'm in, it's not right for me right now," and that can be more visceral. Like I'm done. Like for people in the second half of life, done mowing the lawn. I'm done trying to fix the next project that happens. But I see that as more kind of like tactical. And then, but that can drive a change. And then there's another piece, which I think is a little bit deeper, which says, okay, I know that where I plant myself shapes my social networks. It shapes my sense of purpose, because people that have a shared purpose to me, I'm more likely to follow up on that. For example, let's suppose a part of your purpose is being engaged in like a church community. Just use, one example. Well, if you're in a place where you're not part of a vibrant church, for example, that's going to be hard for you to engage the community, but also find purpose through volunteering efforts that are part of that. So there's this other element. I just recognize why place is one of, if not the most important decision you make in your life. And you make it like many times, because you make it explicitly when you move,
right? But
you make it implicitly when you don't move. And some of those decisions also mean that it's not just your place, but also how you choose to engage in your place. So, the brand of my company here, HERE, it has a dual meaning. It has this idea of like, have you found your place? Oh, it's here. This is it. This is where X marks a spot. That's an important piece. That's the more obvious definition of it. But the other piece is arguably just as important, and that's this idea of presence. Like, okay, are you here with me, Mike? Yes. Are you engaged? Are you focused on this? And so you might find yourself even in the right place, but if you're not present in your place, if you're not understanding the ways in which you can make your place be all that it can be, that then too you're losing out on the potential around it. So I think there's a lot to unpack, and I think it has meaningful influence as individuals think this through. But oh my gosh, there's so much opportunity for providers to say, hey, are you in the senior living business, or are you in the business of creating great places that unlock the potential for people to thrive in the stage of life that they're in?
Yeah, and I want to get into that a little bit more, Ryan, because I would love to get your insights on who's doing it well, or things that you've seen out there that you think are particularly striking. And I really love the idea of just kind of unpacking: are we senior living, or are we what are we really providing, right? So, I mean, for instance, I've heard of one community that has a waiting list right as long as your arm because they require volunteerism as part of the contract for living in that community. And I think there's education, but I mean, what are you seeing out there that really strikes you?
There's an interesting moment happening right now, Mike, and this moment, a number of these trends were happening before the pandemic, but they've continued on throughout, and now we're on the other side of at least certainly the peak pandemic. Not to say that COVID isn't still with us. I think what's happening is a number of people, more people were spending time alone. Go back a decade ago, on average, across ages, ethnicities, income levels, some research has shown that people are spending on average about 10 hours more alone than they did 10 years ago. And that is, we're still kind of getting the bottom of it, is how much of it's social media, how much of it's streaming on Netflix. I'm not certain. But in general, there's a difference between kind of solitude and recharging the batteries, which is valuable, versus a sense of disconnection that happens through lifestyle. So when I'm spending 10 hours more alone, it not just impacts me, but it impacts, I'm not seeing Mike as often because of that lifestyle decision that we have. And this is, again, it's crossing a number across our society at large. And so I'm seeing in some circles now, it's raising questions around, like, what does commitment mean? What does it mean, to be a member? What does it mean to be a member of a church, of a golf club, of your broader community, of a senior living community? Part of your example that you went through moments ago was the ante is raised. I know there's like LaSalle University in the Northeast. People move in there. They're obligated to take classes. It's like there's an expectation that comes with it. They've done quite well. Ann Doyle, if you haven't had her on the show, I think would be a good guest for you. But you have these ideas of like, wait a second, the world's changed in different ways. The social tissues of our community has changed. The social fabric. You see a number of sociologists talk a bit about this in some detail. What are the ramifications for senior living providers? And so I think there's one of the big ones, which I talk a fair amount about, which with some of the clients I work with, we spend some time talking about, is around this idea of empowerment. And empowerment is cultural, although it can be reinforced with the design. I think Jill Vitale Awesome wrote a book around the time of mine a couple of years ago, and she's an executive leader in the not-for-profit senior living domain, and she talks a lot about this as well. And it's this idea of, to some degree, senior living has grown up with this idea of, kind of being a cruise ship. We're going to provide for you different services. It's also been historically a very homogenous mix of people, and that's worked for different reasons. But as we turn around, we look around the corner and we see that it's not as homogenous. We've got people from all sorts of different backgrounds, more single people, more educated people at large, people with the different set of economic realities that they're facing. It's less common to have the millionaire next door. People are living longer. We're in a post-pension environment. Social Security is likely to get restructured to make the economics work. It's very different. And people want to have it in general more their way, not necessarily here's how we do it. And so I think there's a number of reasons why this idea of empowerment, when I mean empowerment, it means it's not necessarily I'm going to do it for you, but here are the tools. What what do you want to craft? And by the way, that's how our lives have been pretty much our whole adult lives. So it's consistent with how people live their lives. And so I think leaning towards a cultures of empowerment, I think is one example anyway, Mike, where I see communities being more successful down the road, because it doesn't say, you don't feel like you have to check part of who you are at the door. You're able to
Right.
bring all of it, and
Right.
you are a creator, curator even of what the community is.
Yeah, you know what I like to sort of give an example, because I feel United Church Homes is a big embracer of a diversity. I believe that we firmly commit that diversity strengthens the whole, and that
Mm,
the way that I've explained this in the past is kind of like the traditional idea. I'm a Canadian, so I've been through the U.S. immigration system, and America's sort of traditionally had this idea of a melting pot, where you
yeah.
come in and you give up your. And I'm being maybe just a little stereotypical, and excuse me, listeners, if I'm not getting this right, but what I've heard in the past, that you're an American now, you're giving up your old culture, you're embracing this new culture. Here you are, right? And then in Canada, what I believe is that they have this concept called mosaic, where if you come to Canada as an immigrant, you're expected to retain a lot of these traditions and things that have given you identity, because Canada is enriched by diversity. Diversity strengthens the whole, and that's what I hope that we create at United Church Homes. But in terms of empowerment, I think we've seen it for ourselves. What we're starting to do is we're doing the resident kind of, we call them ideathons, and we'll come in and we'll put as many residents who wish to participate through a 2-day workshop. And it's a human-centered design workshop, inspired by the work at AARP. And I will give residents $1,000 seed money just to put good ideas into action and go off and we've had residents start garden programs and have raised an additional tens of thousands of dollars additional for these garden projects, because they simply just kill it every single time when they go through these exercises. So we hear that, but I mean, we're always kind of looking for more. And I do want to get on. I think the last topic I want to cover with you is this idea of CCRC at home. But in just thinking about how we innovate at senior living itself, I'm just wondering if that inspires anything further from you, or if there's something that what crossed your mind, just in this last little bit.
Yeah, well, I think given our shared interest and background in innovation, I think part of it, and that's a great story about how you're empowering residents to come up with innovative ideas, and then helping them get off the ground. But I think a lot of it, going back to your comment earlier, is around the framing. If this field sees itself as senior living, that's it's a far narrower aperture than how can we become partners with people to thrive over increasingly longer life, or how can we build and activate great places for people to thrive over increasingly long life. That's a different framing, and it allows you to think much more broadly about ideas and products and services and cultural ethos and technologies that can further people embracing all that a longer life means. And fundamentally, for a moment, longer life isn't necessarily a better life. In fact, Genesis, one of the largest skilled nursing platforms companies, years ago, I was with a meeting with him, and they'd done some consumer research, and they found that people feared skilled nursing worse than they did death itself. And it was a reminder that it's not just lifespan; it's managing to and trying to optimize for an equally long wealth span. So how long are you healthy, and then also a wealth span, an equally long place where you can afford a life that you're excited about. So that intersection of lifespan, health span, and wealth span doesn't happen by accident. Good fortune certainly helps, but there's a lot you can do in taking agency in this. So I think, to the extent that senior living providers can have this broader aperture and recognize that elevate, like we're talking about, like place matters. Like, hey, sure, you might care about your diet, diet matters and exercise, But if you get place right, it helps all these things, in a better way. It has a direct and indirect piece. Like, it literally is one of the most important decisions you'll ever make. So the more that I think leading senior living projects can embrace that reality, educate people, back to the theme of your Ruth Frost Parker symposium coming up around ageism, we got to be careful. I mean, people are just ageist against themselves. There's something called the U-shaped happiness curve, which has been proven globally, and there people are a certain happiness level in their 20s, and then it kind of dips down until their late 40s, early 50s in the U.S. I like to think it has some correlation to teenagers in the house, and then it shoots up, and then in your 70s and 80s, your self-reported well-being is greater than it's ever been. Like, that's a narrative that most people don't know, and place can help dictate that. So I see tremendous opportunity, here. And then one other piece related to just innovation, how to think about it, is you get the blue ocean, red ocean dynamic. And if we're in markets where, just like you said earlier, Mike, we're kind of looking the same, stock pictures are the same, our mission statements are the same, it can be a lot for people to understand what the differences are, and you end up really competing with each other in certain ways. Mm-hmm. And that's the red ocean. And so the penetration rate, the number of people age and income qualified to move in, it's gone down over time in this field. And so if there's any way in which that penetration rate can actually grow while the population is growing, now that is an exciting place for business models, but also an exciting place for sustainability and impact.
Yeah, and this is where we're going to kind of pop quiz you a little bit here, Ryan, because we're both familiar with senior living, advancements in senior living, places created for people that these things that we recognize and want to foster and want to but we have people who will prefer to age at home. You have people that may not be able to live at home. Maybe the value, they're all their values tied up in the home. There's a lot going on there. So, and then we have this concept of CCRC at home. So if you were, here's the pop quiz. If you were to design a CCRC at home program, what would the elements be of that program? And then what would you call it?
Okay. So for listeners here, this is indeed a pop quiz. So I would,
sorry about that.
No, but this is good. This is fantastic. What I would do is I would double back and say, I'll answer your second question first. And that is, definitely wouldn't call it CCRC at home.
And that CCRC, listeners, is continuing care retirement community. I'm so sorry.
But to put an exclamation mark on that's, and by the way, I'm not trying to critique those that created it. I think it's, as a concept, very important, which we'll get into. But as a brand, what it does is it's taking the mindset of senior living, using a fairly, abstract and esoteric term as a CCRC, and then applying it in this broader consumer field. So we're going to take senior living, we're going to bring it back home, as opposed to understanding the mindset and psychographics of the consumer. So anyway, we certainly wouldn't call it CCRC at home. I think I could imagine it being more about, focusing more on human flourishing, like thriving. I'm not even sure I'd have it at home be part of it. I'd introduce this conversation and to say, well, yeah, this way of thinking, this modality can change depending on what your preferences and affordability is. On the idea of what does it actually look like? Well, since we're brainstorming, it's pop quiz. I would start with an honest a self-assessment and third-party assessment to say, okay, are you in your current four walls? Because that's how we're defining it. To what degree are you really set up to succeed, to thrive, not just now, but in a 3 to 5 year period? And just because it's your personal preference doesn't necessarily mean it's something that your doctor, your financial advisor, other advisors, family would say is the right thing. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it's helpful to have a real good gauge of reality around you. And I think if I were to create a program like this, it would be in a relationship to like a wide variety of product and price point options. So it's not just your current, say, single family home in the suburbs you've been living in for 30 years, or it's senior living. It could be apartments nearby. It could be age restricted apartments nearby. It could be ADUs that we have relationships with. You could be part of. So you actually have a menu of options that help you stay in your broader sense of community. Now, it's going to require scale because as you have one of the reasons why senior living, while expensive, can provide what it does at certain prices is you get the benefit of scale that you can deliver food, different services. When things are scattered about, the broader market, that's harder, to deliver in both a proactive and a reactive setting. Clearly, you have to lean a lot more on technology. Wearables is part of it, probably. So smart scales and so on, things that allow some sense, some dashboard of your life, a greater connectivity to your primary care doc, to get a sense, is this really, are we helping you thrive the way we can? The idea of a self-assessment wouldn't be a one-time thing. It'd be something you do on a regular basis. Am I where I should be? And then particularly with the proliferation over time with AI and so on, being able to anticipate when you might need to have certain services delivered to you, or actually moving to a better setting could be better. So I don't see it as I see technology being important, skill being important, branding being important, but really having it be centered around helping that individual or couple thrive in this current and future chapters of their lives.
Now, the word "thrive" is so important at any age, and if you think about that, that sort of philosophy, you can think in the U-shaped curve you talked about. Maybe even just sort of applying it at other points in our life will raise that dip up a little bit, And so
That's right.
Ryan, I mean, I could unpack a lot more here. I mean, maybe we'll have you on the show again to kind of go into some of these a little bit deeper. But we're going to stop. The first, we always surprise people. Okay, we always like to ask people 3 questions about aging that we ask every single guest. So first of all, can I do that with you?
Yes, please.
Okay, pop quiz. But first of all, I just want to say, let's give you just an opportunity to plug here.life for your assessment. But where can we find you? Name of the book again?
Yeah. So the book's called Right Place, Right Time: The Ultimate Guide to Choosing a Home for the Second Half of Life. And you can find it on the here.life website, but Amazon, some local bookstores will have it as well. So that's the actual book. As you point out, Mike, if you're interested in the self-assessment, you can find it on the here.life website. It just takes a couple minutes, and then you get a graph on based on the set of questions, and then some recommendations depending where you are. And then one thing I'd also say, we didn't get a chance to talk about this quite as much, Mike, but on the consumer side, as this has played out, I've turned the book into a workshop and now a course. We did a beta test here in the spring that was really well received. So now offering on a more limited commercial basis, those options virtually done really helps people actually get to a plan. And then on the senior living kind of thought leadership side, on the here.life website, you'll find some resources there. Do a fair amount of keynote speaking for groups that really want to dig into this, and as part of the core strategic planning process, that's really help organizations. I don't believe that you can do strategic planning in a weekend. I believe it's something to really do right. You got to dig in. You got to be rigorous about it. It's a longer process, but it can really be transformative. So if any of your listeners are in organizations where that's where they find themselves, happy to connect with them. They can reach me at Ryan, RYAN, at here.life. But Ryan, those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
All right, Ryan at here.life. Thank you very much. Okay, question number 1 for you. When you think about how you've aged, what do you think has changed about you or grown with you that you really like about yourself?
I would say that I probably 2 things in particular, Mike. I'm an entrepreneur. The way this has unfolded, but my entrepreneurship journey has really been fueled by my passion for wanting to make a difference. And but I'm not an entrepreneur. Like if I took those classes in high school, college, afterwards, that's not really who I am. And part of it was my appetite for taking risk. And I would say that as I've gotten older, maybe I've gotten more foolish, but I've also gotten more courageous. And so I've valued the fact that you can fall down and you can pick yourself up. And there's ideas that you have that can make a difference, and to be able to share those with others and be committed to that cause. I don't think I necessarily saw the world as being as big an opportunity for making an impact when I was younger.
That's
So
interesting.
I've been combination of courage and then the ability to see impact. I've learned that over time.
Yeah. And look, I mean, there's a reason why most new businesses are started by people in their 40s and their 50s and things like that. I don't presume your age, sir, but I mean, there's something to say to that. So that's very interesting. Okay, question number two.
I did get carded the other day, but I'm not. I'm older than
All
21.
right. Okay. Okay. Question number two. What surprised you the most about what has surprised you most about you as you've aged?
When when my wife and I got married little over 21 years ago, our our premarital pastor counseling as we were getting married, he said, "You and your wife will completely change every 5 years." And I'm like, that is ridiculous. Like, there's no way you completely change over 5 years. And sure, his comment he was exaggerated to prove a point. And that doesn't necessarily mean that my core values have changed. I don't believe they have. But how I see the world uh, has changed. And even this conversation we're having right now, when I was applying to college or business school, or what, I would never imagined I'd be having this conversation right now, doing what I'm doing. And so I think what has surprised me is the degree of change and growth that's possible. And then when you layer in the fact that we're living longer, or going back to my daughter, and kids born today in developed countries are expected to live to at least to 150% of them. Like it really is this, like, oh my gosh, this like choose your own adventure piece that you literally have very different chapters. Laura Carstensen at Stanford, I think she's been Stanford Center of Longevity. She's been pretty expressive around. It used to be this narrative of learn, earn, retire. And now, oh my gosh, we have all these chapters and things we can mix around. My wife's gone back to school to be a nurse, and she's in her 40s.
Wow.
So
Wow,
yeah, I think that's been a big surprise to me, is that you have these different chapters and you have these things that may be turned on and excited by that you would have never anticipated when you were younger.
that is very cool. Very, very cool. All right. Third question, last question. Um, is there someone that you've met or been in your life that has set a good example for you in aging? Someone that has inspired you to what we say here, age with abundance.
Yeah, so I have a good friend, a mentor. His name is Fred Smith, and he lives. I'm in Austin, Texas, and he lives a bit north, uh, I'll call it the greater Dallas area. He wouldn't appreciate that, but I'll call it the greater Dallas area.
Okay.
And he, what I've really appreciated about my friend Fred, and he's in his 70s, is that he is he's abundantly curious, and that curiosity has enabled him to forge contacts, friendships, relationships with people across generations, across geographies. He reads, he writes. He's always learning and open to debating topics. I don't think he necessarily gives strategy. It's just dessert in terms of its impact on organizations, but that's another topic. But it's interesting to see people that are every day they're striving for growth and learning, and also relationship building. And I see that in Fred, and I admire in him.
Terrific story. Well, Ryan, thank you very, very much for being a guest on The Art of Aging, and thank you very much for answering the questions. Fascinating discussion. I could talk all day with you. But most importantly, thank you, our listeners. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Art of Aging, which is part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from United Church Homes. And we want to hear from you. How do you define place? What jobs do you think the place where you live in is doing for you right now? And is it doing those jobs well? And how do you think of your life? Is your life as chapters? Is this something that resonates with you? Let us know. Come to the Abundant Aging Podcast.com. That's our website. You can find this podcast and all of our others. You can find us at YouTube under United Church Homes. And of course, I encourage you to check Ryan out at here.life, where you can get his contact details and, importantly, start taking your own livability assessment and really understand what place means to you. You can visit us more about the Ruth Frost Parker Center. Visit us at unitedchurchhomes.org/Parker-Center. And again, show ideas, suggestions, complaints, anything, abundantagingpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.